The hardest job at any chip designer that doesn't actually own its own foundry, and maybe even those that do, is figuring out what wafer start commitment level to make for a new compute engine in the data center. Guess too low, and you are supply constrained. Guess too high, and you end up with far too many chips, and that results in lower profits and inventory on the books. We have been pondering the competitive situation between Intel and its Cascade Lake, Xeon SP generation of server processors and AMD and its Rome, Epyc alternatives, and it is not so much that we were ever surprised that AMD could reach double-digit shipment market share, as was the stake that AMD President and Chief Executive Officer Lisa Su drove into the ground as it returned to the data center 3 years ago. Rather, it is that given all of the difficulties that Intel has had with its 10-nanometer manufacturing processes, which are now 6 years late on the server, and now the slip with its 7-nanometer processes, which affects Intel's cGPU accelerator lineup next year more than it does the server lineup, which would not be on 10-nanometer processes until the shrink to 7-nanometer in 2022 according to the N1 iteration of the current plan, how AMD's share is not already at 15%, or even higher. The first 10% or so of market share took 3 years, coming off basically zero before the launch of the Naples Epyc chips. And we keep wondering if it will take half as long to get the next 10%, which is normal for a lot of markets with an aggressive competitor, or about the same time, which sometimes happens, or a very long time, or maybe it never happens because Intel can keep making arguments to server makers and server buyers that convinces them to stay within the Xeon SP fold. We think there is a combination of factors at work that make it both easy and tough for AMD to grow its share of the $79 billion total addressable market that it is chasing with its consumer and corporate compute engines. But here, we are focused on the data center and to a certain extent of the edge, but we never lose sight of the fact that the initial re-entry into the server market with Epyc was very much predicated on what was happening with Ryzen desktop chips based on the same Zen 1 and Zen 2 cores. Based on statements that AMD's top brass made when discussing the company's second quarter 2020 financial results, we strongly suspect that demand for AMD's Epyc server chips is outstripping supply, and furthermore we believe that the supply constraint is really a function of how much demand there is for the 7-nanometer manufacturing processes at foundry partner Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corp,